Game Dev Microtalks. My name is Martin, and I'll do the first one, I think. And then we don't have Zach Wendt here today. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it. So if you're here just to view VR stuff, sorry, there's not going to be any of that. People are still walking in a little bit, so I think we'll start in like another minute or two. Oh, okay, sure, why not? So I'm a local game developer. I do iOS primarily. My background was in web development before that, but essentially I've been freelance iOS for 2 years or so, and been doing iOS for about 5 years. I have some apps in the App Store. You can search the App Store for my name. Yeah, Martin Grider. You know, there's only a few Martin G's, so you can probably see the autocomplete after you put in Martin G. My first game was an app called Action Chess. Or my first app was a game called Action Chess. That's a kind of a cross between chess and Tetris, sort of. It's more like Tetris Attack if you played that. And I'm really interested in both puzzle games, like Tetris-y puzzle games, what I call action puzzle games, and then also in board games. And so I do a lot of board game conversion stuff. So yeah, maybe I'll just leap into it. So I have been doing this long enough that I started writing the same code over and over and over again. And I decided to encapsulate that. And I call it generic game model because I have no better name for it. And so this is just kind of a quick introduction to that. More a how do I use it than anything else. So what is it? It's a small collection of reusable classes. It's basically just two classes. There's a model class and a view class. And at first I thought it was MVC, but actually it's not MVC at all because there's no controller. The view is actually what sends touch input back to the game model. So the game model and the game view are tightly coupled and know about each other. And actually that's not true. Only the view knows about the game model. But the view does some things like displaying a grid and then translating the coordinates on the grid to XY coordinates in your game. And then it also has some built-in functionality to display the grid as either like a standard square grid or a hexagonal grid or just a label. And it just eases doing things really fast. So I was able to do some prototypes in like 16 hours. So it's also CocoaPod. If you know about CocoaPods, essentially for iOS, it's a package manager for iOS, essentially. And so you can install it by just using this pod generic game model in your project if you want to try it out. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the games that I've written with it. This was the first one. This was for a game jam at 360 IDev in 2012. And I was writing 2 games at the time. I was working on Oppa Citrus, which is in the App Store, and For the Win, and kind of looking at like, oh man, a lot of this stuff is really like almost exactly the same. Like if I spent the time, I could abstract it all out. And so overnight game jam, I did just that and pulled it out into this game that I worked with one other person on. And he did all the graphics and spent like 2 or 3 hours getting that lightning bolt to align directly with the cloud and the tower. And those were his contributions. But it was great. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's a very simple game. It's not like my contributions were great either. So yeah, I guess I'll describe this game just really quickly. Like you place the cloud at the top, so they're just different colored clouds, and on the grid. And then if you place it next to a cloud of the same color, they expand and become one size larger. And eventually you're filling up the board. And we had planned to maybe at some point you could remove clouds with something, but we never got to that point. Again, we worked on it for about 6 hours. So this was the first use of GGM. And then Let 'em Dare, a couple months later, I used it, and at that game we decided we wanted to make isometric, and I'm like, well, it's still a grid, like I should be able to use this. So there is a translation layer, and the isometric code is in the project, but it's not built in. You can't just like flip a switch and it'll work in isometric. You've got to actually look at what I did and figure out how that's going to work for you. I've not worked on another isometric game since then, so I haven't really done the work to make that built in. And then, so I have this app in the App Store called Drawcade. It's probably my most downloaded app. This is just a drawing application for the iCade. Who's familiar with the iCade? More than when I gave this talk before. So the iCade is like a little desktop arcade cabinet that you put your iPad into, and it's got a joystick and I think 8 buttons. And as soon as I got one, of course, my daughter, 2-year-old daughter, wanted to play with it, and I was like, well, there's nothing for her to play, so I just wrote up this game quick that allowed her to draw with it. Essentially, each button is just a different color, and so. I had just hand-coded that, but essentially it was just a grid, very similar to what GGM does. And so January 2013, I converted it to use GGM at the same time as I was making it universal. And that was the third thing to use it, and the first thing in the App Store. It really took less than a day to convert it. And then around the same time, January 2013, I started working on this game, Catch Up. I'm still working on it. It's not in the App Store yet. And it uses a hexagonal grid. And I thought, well, why not? And so GGM also supports hexagons out of the box. And that's it. I think Catch Up is going to be done sometime this month, I'm hoping. It's a very simple 2-player abstract strategy game. Essentially, you're placing a stone of your color onto the board. And every turn, you can place 2 stones. And if you make your largest group on the board larger than your opponent's largest group, then they get 3 stones the next turn to catch up. And the end of the game, whoever has the largest group remaining on the board is the winner. There's no captures or anything. It's a super simple game. And it's ridiculous that it's taken me a year to come out with it. So I did do some freelance work last year that was game development for kids. This real company is the publisher of this. This is just a match game. And it's the sliding hole match game, but you drag just like the sliding hole puzzle, you can move these tiles around, and then if they match up next to like the 2 8s match up, then they're removed from the board and pieces drop down. And there are actually 3 of these in the App Store: numbers and counting, numbers and words, and then counting and words. It's really just different tile sets, the same game. But that was client work. And then December 2013, I had this idea for a board game that I had invented. This is my own design. And I thought, nobody's going to play this unless I make an app out of it. And so I made an app out of it. It really only took me like 6 hours. And that was all because of GGM. It was just super easy. And then I did a client project that was a poker game. And this really pushed the envelope of GGM, because I found out that I could use instances of the model inside the model. So actually, this is a 2-player game. There's also, it supports 3 players. Each one of these grids is its own instance of GGM, and so the main parent class just has instances of itself. It's kind of interesting, and I felt like it was really easy to develop just because of that aspect alone. And then that supports the dragging of these cards, and it's just another thing that was easy to do because of GGM. And I'm also porting my very first video game, which was written in Flash originally, to iOS. And I decided, I'll use GGM again. I mean, it's on a grid, and yeah, it definitely expedited development. I think I've only worked on this about 4 weeks so far, and it's completely playable. Now I'm adding features, of course. So it's going to have achievements and leaderboards and things that the original didn't have. I think that's it. So I also prepared a little bit to talk about juicing, but I think that's going to be the end of my Microtalk. So there's some slides here. This is all available on my website, which is chesstrist.com, and you can check out this slide deck if you want more information about it. And then next up, I think we'll have Dev.
gentle with this. All right. Thank you. So if you guys will indulge me, my wife couldn't make it today. It's her birthday in like a week. Can I get you guys to do a happy birthday for her? Crystal. All right. On three. 1, 2, 3.
Happy birthday, Crystal.
Awesome. We're all friends and family now. So, is this running yet? Okay. I have your ear for about 6 minutes, and I'm going to keep this brief and very information dense and move at a brisk pace. And going to talk about my history and some very important metaphysical and philosophical questions like who am I? How did I get here? What have I done? What do I do now? Why am I here? Does any of this even matter? And can things exist that we can't measure? So to begin with, who am I? My name is Jana. I'm the Technical Director of Research and Development for Preferred Interactive. And thank you, Martin. Also the guy who works on like games at night. I guess I'm one of them. And how did I get here? I started in Erie, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. Got my BS in computer systems. I got my master's in 3D animation, special effects, and Boca Raton. Then I moved up here in 2005 and taught in the game development and design program at Brown College. And then I moved out to Phoenix and taught games and made games for a couple more years. And up to Burlington, Vermont, taught games and made games for a couple years. Sarasota, Florida, where I worked on medical iPad apps. And I just moved back here in June. And I drove for every one of those moves, by the way. But so I'm kind of new. I'm old but new to the scene, so I appreciate being invited to be here. What have I done? These are some of the games I've worked on: Stargate Resistance, Sea Snake, Alien, Roy G. Beats. There's a few others didn't make it. I think Down the Tube is still on the App Store. So what do I do now? I am the Technical Director of Research and Development at Preferred Interactive. You might have seen our interactive design, the backyard thing for Care 11 recently, and I'm currently working on this 3-game indie pack, Blue Cube. And so why am I here? Well, I'm here because Martin was nice enough to ask me to come, and I make games. But more than that, I was originally going to just kind of pitch my Kickstarter, which is flailing, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But that seemed really selfish, so I wanted to bring in some ideas of how can we use some data. And this is the intro to Blue Cube, which is the 3 indie game pack that we're kickstarting. I'm kickstarting with a couple friends right now. The idea for it was to launch 3 indie games and give the maximum value to any backers. This is the first game, Zillion. It's really kind of my baby where the Kickstarter started. It's a 3D snake game, and then it turns into a marble rolling game, and it comes with a level editor. And that's kind of my baby. Quantum Manor is being developed by my friend and former student, Bill Jamstad, in Massachusetts. It's a first-person survival horror game. And what's cool about it is as you turn around, the walls change behind you, so you can't backtrack in the same path that you've done. And then the last, and each color of the flashlight does something different. The last one is Boom Room, which was actually a game that I made and designed in 2008 or something, and I just wanted to update it. It's a really simple physics puzzler. Physics changes from level to level. You boom in the room, and you create, you try to get everything to the goal. So we launched the Kickstarter. It's flailing for a couple reasons. One of them is we lost our internet marketing guy the week before the Kickstarter, which is not good to leave a bunch of antisocial developers out there to get this stuff done. And you can see right there, we are 12% funded. So when that happens, you start to feel like a failure, and you start asking yourself, does anything matter? What is the purpose of life? And as like a craft developer, what I really wanted to find out was, is there goodwill out there for the games? If there's enough goodwill, I'll continue to work on the games. So how do I measure that? There's no unit of measurement for goodwill, for people's empathy towards the game. And this is an old IBM philosophy. Something doesn't exist if it cannot be measured. And that got me kind of thinking about this. And of course, I started thinking about black holes, because by the nature of a black hole, light can't escape it, so you can't see it, but you can see the event horizon, the light around the black hole, which is evidence that the black hole exists. That seemed like a good place to start, but I also wanted to keep in mind, okay, the Gabe Newell's 2009 talk at E3 about the transition of gaming going to be a service as opposed to a product, which means that the release of these projects is a process and not an event, so you have to take multiple samples and re-evaluate everything from time to time. Now, there's a big difference between something being well-known and well-liked. And I think if we all know who this guy is, I can even do a symbol, but whether or not he's well-liked is a completely different subject. And if we were to misconstrue the number of like YouTube views for his videos as the amount of people that like him, we would have some garbage out. Now, we wouldn't have garbage in. This is an old saying, obviously. We would still have correct data, but if we process it incorrectly, we would get some garbage output. Come on, come on. I'm going a little bit too fast. So what can be measured for my project? Okay, first we had a weird name, so it's at the top of all the Google searches, the number of Facebook likes, YouTube views, stuff like that. That's great, but it's really a quantitative thing. That's really how well known is it, not how well liked is it. So I started going through and ranking the interaction I was having with people. People who would ask, can I write a blog post about it, and would blog about it. This is one of my favorite ones. Is there any chance of Linux support? That really tells me that there's genuine interest in the project. I started ranking those with higher numbers as I was trying to quantify this. So I'm playing God here, and I'm trying to make something out of nothing. And this begs for the degrees of existence. If 1, 2, 3 people like it, does goodwill exist? A little bit. But the bad will exist also, and they're not mutually exclusive. It doesn't echo out to 0. So you can have good and bad, and they don't cancel each other out. There's first and third person types of impressions. Third person is like reading the articles, watching the videos. First person is once you get your hands on it, they can be 2 completely different things. And you have to come up with your own measurement tools and your own metrics when you're doing this, which makes it inherently subjective, and you have to act like data and use your heuristic algorithms to figure out whether or not it is something that you find useful. And that's about where I'm going to end talking about this, but the idea is that I'm coming up on another black hole. And the idea here is that I'm gathering this information, I'm spiraling it, but just like real black holes, I have no idea what's going to happen once I get in there. And I encourage you guys to try to figure out what black holes are in your projects, ways that you can take the data that's available and meaningfully try to interpolate or extrapolate what people, how people feel about your projects. I just watched something on big data in a different room, and I would call this minuscule data. But you can, it's a lot more personal. You can find me at Jana on Twitter and bluecube.com, and I'll be around, so feel free to come by and say hi. Thank you. Who's next?
Thanks, Dev. Up next is Zach Johnson. A little bit of technical stuff happening.
You say knock knock. There we go. Is it actually showing up there?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Hello. So my name is Zach Johnson. I'm going to be giving a brief debriefing of my game, The Legend of Equipped Pants, and then talking about some other stuff. Right. So a little quickly about me. I'm a JavaScript developer. I've been working for myself for 3 years. My company is Zachstronaut. I do websites, mobile apps, games, that kind of thing. Last summer, I had the privilege of working on the BMO app for Cartoon Network. It was designed locally by Ham in the Fridge, and I did all the programming. It was a lot of fun. I'm a huge fan of Adventure Time. I've done like 20 JavaScript games since 1998, but I'm going to talk about my first personal commercial release. And so that's this game, The Legend of Equipped Pants. So I've had about 19,000 players since November when it came out, end of November, slightly more downloads. It's free on iOS and in the Chrome store on the web if you'd like to play it. Won a couple awards, Best Roll Pants Game of 2013 and Pants of the Year 2013. So what is this game all about? Well, it's really about pants. There's not like a sword. It's not like Zelda where you've got swords and arrows and all that stuff. It's really kind of about pants. So you've got, and pants puns. So your hero is this guy, Sir Pants-a-Lot. And it's an episodic game. So each like 15-minute episode, you might have like puzzles and mazes and stuff. And there's like hidden secrets. You can collect hearts and things like that. Lots of weird people to meet. You've got the Pantsmith who makes pants. So you've got Madam Pantsfree, that's a joke for any Harry Potter fans. The Underwear Taker in the cemetery. There's a Pantaclaus episode, which if you download the app soon, you'll still get to play it before it goes away. There's this guy who might look slightly familiar. Everyone look over here? No? That's me. All right. And of course, there are pants to equip. So you've got Hammer Pants, which let you hammer down posts. Gold Lame. You've got Lumber Slacks. And so in each like 15-minute quest, you're going to have to find some pants, and then maybe there's a villain. You've got Count Pantula and the Underwear Wolf here. And you might be feeling some pants pun fatigue at this point. All right. So technology. This game is written with the Impact game engine. It's a $99 engine, but it's a flat fee. There aren't any like royalties or anything like that. It's a fantastic JavaScript game engine. The documentation alone makes it worth the $99. Very beautiful code, well documented, awesome engine. Comes with a level editor too. And then to get it onto iOS, I used an open source tool by the same person who did Impact called Ejecta. So this is an open source project on GitHub. And it lets you drop a JavaScript-based game into an iOS project and compile, or Xcode project and compile for iOS. And the performance is great because it maps all of your JavaScript draw calls to OpenGL. So you get like nearly native performance from all of your JavaScript stuff. And then like the audio is mapped to OpenAL. So you get some, you can do 3D too. You can do WebGL just ports straight to OpenGL. So you can kind of write all your kind of business logic in JavaScript and still get native performance for graphics. And it also exposes APIs for Game Center and in-app purchases, which are super easy to use. So it was a great tool. And besides that, I'm working on the next episode. And you've got a skeleton there with the skeleton keys. More pants puns? All right. So, analytics. The best part of doing analytics in your video game is watching people play. So I created analytics for my game. And that's what we have here. So I can like watch people play my game, or I can watch everybody play my game. So that's like the first day. That was just the first day. That was the day that I launched. And that's like every single person playing. You can also watch like an individual person play, which is a lot of fun. I'm going to find this person. And then you can just watch this one person play the game. And you'll see them like go up and walk around, and then they're going to come to this puzzle. And they're going to spend a ton of time trying to solve the puzzle. Then they're going to realize that there's a back door, leave, go in the back door, and then move on. So I don't know. You can just like see fun stuff like that. And then once you've got heat maps like that, then you can intentionally design your levels to look like things, which is what I did with my my Santa Claus episode. I made the level into a Christmas tree. So then I made it so that you can watch 6,000 people die playing the game, and it animates out like a Christmas tree. So this got picked up by Kotaku, which was really cool. They thought this was cool and did an article about it. But yeah, it's super fun to gather analytics about your games and make pretty things out of it. All right, so and then just quickly, with the rest of my time, I want to talk a little bit about the scene here in Minnesota, the game scene. So I live in Minnesota, obviously. So first and foremost, there's something called IGDA TC. It's the Twin Cities chapter of the International Game Developers Association. And we actually have 3 monthly events. There's a regular meeting every second Wednesday of the month, where there's generally 2 presentations from game developers locally. It's really awesome, and then we go out and hang out and socialize afterwards. There's also an event all about VR, which is I think what Zach Wendt would have talked about had he been here. I can't remember what day of the month that is. But that's monthly. They're into human-computer interaction and VR. And then we also have a new event that we've been doing that's a multiplayer event. So we go someplace and we play indie and locally made 4-player like local multiplayer games. That's a lot of fun. And it gives us an opportunity to test out game ideas and see what other people are making and that kind of thing. So I highly recommend those if you're interested in games in any way. Like even if you're just interested and never made one, it's awesome. And then beyond that, another thing that I'd like to suggest is the Global Game Jam. This happens every January. It's a 48-hour game jam. It's worldwide, so there's like 10,000 plus people who participate in this worldwide. Locally, at our local site, we had 75 people participate. It's a lot of fun, and I'd love to see more people come, so I'm kind of advertising it. And I made this game called iCycle for, gonna have some trouble getting to the stupid thing. Exit. There we go, technical difficulties. So I made a game called iCycle in 48 hours for the Global Game Jam, which is a giant hideous eyeball, and then you play like Tron-style snakes on the giant hideous eyeball while the eyeball moves around. So, fun project. Yeah, other than that, I'm gonna jump to my last slide really quickly, and thank you for listening to me. I don't think I get questions because I only get 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach. We'll do questions at the end if there's time. Up next, we have Scott Lembcke. after he sets up. Does anyone have any questions for Zach?
What did you use for the analytics, Zach?
I wrote my own analytics package. Really simple. I mean, it's not
Hardcore.
basic stuff.
When did your groups meet, and where did they meet?
What?
Where?
Oh, sorry.
I-
At the Nerdery in South Minneapolis.
Cool, thank you.
Yes. And it's IGDATC.org will get you all the information.
That's igdatc.org.
Thank you.
And the VR meetup is, I think, the 4th Wednesday of the month.
Yeah.
I think the upcoming one next month or next week? I think it's next week. And it's about, shoot, I knew what it was about.
3D imaging with two cameras.
Oh, that's right, stereoscopic photo. Yeah, so they're going to do, like somebody's going to do kind of a history of stereoscopic photos and that technology.
Okay. Hello, I'm Scott Lembcke. So how did I get involved with games? I have had a company with a friend of mine from college. It's Holly Moon Software. And we've been doing that since 2009 now. One of the big things we write is a physics engine called Chipmunk 2D. It's a 2D rigid body physics engine. And that's kind of how I got involved with the Cocos 2D project. So what is Cocos 2D? It's an iOS native game library that's built around Objective-C and OpenGL. It was originally created by a guy named Ricardo. He's kind of moved on to a different project now, so he left it to someone else in the community. And then I got kind of pulled in for my physics experience. And so Cocos 2D, it provides you sprites, actions are things you can chain together to do animations, that sort of thing. Like move an object here, then cause it to rotate, that sort of thing. All sorts of like timer support for timed actions you want to do, particle effects, that sort of thing. Lots more features, that's kind of the basic idea. As a quick example. Wow, that's small. All right. So, like simple 2D games. This is one of our like simple examples that we package with it. So, simple sprite-based games like that. Let's see. So that's what Cocos 2D is. So I got pulled in to working on the 3.0 version of it, where we extended a lot of features in Cocos 2D. One of the new things is we kind of redid the way that input works, like touch input. Previously, it was you had to make like special layers that would interact or intercept the input, touch input, which was kind of hard to use. So now, kind of like in UI kit, everything's a responder, and you can just register for events that you want to receive. There's kind of a UI layer that we added where you get scroll views and buttons and stuff like that that are kind of built into Cocos 2D. So it's kind of like a simple subset of what UI kit would provide. CC Physics is the part that I worked most on. That's like integrated rigid body physics directly into the engine. So you can just say like a sprite has physical properties, and it'll simulate it, and you can add gravity to things, collision shapes, callbacks for when certain types of things collide. Resolution handling was simplified a lot. So like when you want to make something that works on both like a Retina iPhone and an iPad, a lot of times you'll want to share certain sizes of assets. And before that was a little awkward to do, so we cleaned that up so it's much simpler to support like a tablet and a phone with the same code base. And integrated sprite builder support, which I'll get to later. Sprite builder is kind of an editor, so that was kind of a big feature. Yeah, so a sprite builder is like a scene editor for Cocos 2D. It looks kind of like something that's a mix between like the Unity editor, people are familiar with that, and interface builder in Xcode. So it lets you edit scenes, edit like objects that you want to import. They can be composite objects. It manages your assets, so you can bring all your sounds and your image files into the program, and it'll convert PSDs to your destination image format for you, all that sort of stuff. It can create sprite sheets easily. It's a smart sprite sheet feature. So like if you just have like a folder full of images, it'll just make the sprite sheet for you, and then you can just access the images with your same original path. And kind of the other big feature is a company named Portable is kind of funding everyone to work on this. Like these CocoaStudio and Sprite Builder are both fully open source projects. And at the moment they exist because App Portable is like funding all this. And what App Portable does is they have a layer where you can compile your iOS projects directly to Android. So this was kind of like a nice feature for CocoaStudio, where it was traditionally, Objective-C, very tied to iOS. You now can compile stuff to Android. And it's really just like a compiler tool chain that they provide and a set of libraries that re-implement like significant parts of UI kit, that sort of stuff. And you can just take your Xcode project directly, and it'll pull the settings out of that to compile for you. Kind of example of what Sprite Builder looks like is, so you have like your assets on the left that you can browse. You got a timeline on the bottom where you can edit animations for things. The top part, editing your scenes. Okay, so and then so on to the future. We've released CocoaStudio 3 a couple of months ago. And so what we've been working on since then is new rendering support. Like traditionally, the performance, if you wanted to get good performance out of rendering lots of sprites, you have to put them in a batch, which is slightly awkward to do. So we're redoing the rendering engine, so it does all the batching for you. You just tell it to draw sprites, and if it can batch them up, it'll do it automatically. Custom rendering, so you can do all sorts of like custom terrain drawing or drawing your own meshes, that sort of thing. It makes it much easier to do that. Editing shaders is much simpler. So we want to do shader effects. You only need to know how to write a fragment shader versus, like there's several types of shaders you need to do. And a lot of them aren't intuitive, like what exactly they do. So we've simplified that significantly. Another big feature was you can mix physics and actions. So like when things that are animated from CocoaStudio didn't mix well with things that had physics attached to them. And we have it set up so that the two are pretty well synced now. So good future on there. Any questions? Yes?
What's your background before you did game development, like before?
So my business partner and I went to college together, and we started at a company called Infinite Campus that did student information systems software. And basically, we only worked there long enough to, get some savings and start our own company. So.
Did you study computer science?
Yes, yes.
So I believe there used to be a CocoaStudio port for Android. So is that sort of no longer necessary with the portable support?
So there's actually a few ports of CocoaStudio. It kind of got picked up by a lot of people. It was pretty popular. So there's like an HTML5 version. There's CocoaStudio X, which is the C++ version, which is, I think that's probably the one you're referring to. It runs on like Linux and Android and Windows, and so it's got a lot of support that way. It's all written in C++, which a lot of people that like the original CocoaStudio liked it because it was Objective-C. So that was, a lot of people didn't necessarily follow it to do that for Android support.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Scott. I don't know. I'm not providing any entertainment here or anything, any value. That's what I was looking for. Next up, we have Joel Stewart.
Me.
Yay! Yep.
Is this fun? Right.
I think so.
Maybe.
Hmm.
Maybe.
Yay. Yep.
I can't
Do you want a mirror? Do you know how to mirror?
Yeah. Maybe.
How many people make games in the room?
Yeah, how many people in the room have made a game or are interested in game development? Sweet.
Okay. All right, this is going to be a little bit of an awkward talk. I am not talking about something that I did. I'm talking about something that someone else did. And it's kind of like a post-mortem. Since I'm a game developer, these guys in the front are game developers, hopefully all of you guys are game developers, something that came out in the last year for mobile platforms probably caught a lot of our interest. It was the MFI game controller from Apple and the support for game developers they got. So let's talk really quickly about those game controllers. First batch was kind of meh. We had the Logitech one, which was not the extended one. It was really kind of a missed opportunity. Moga came out with a couple. They did not perform very well for a few different reasons we'll talk about. And then Steel Series came out with one, which is probably the best one of the group. However, Apple internally, I guess I should tell you how I know some of this information. In my day job, I interact with Apple a lot, and so some of this is basically coming from their editorial review teams as well as their App Store review teams, and just kind of the problems that they ran into in the last 9 months with these MFI game controllers, and why we don't see them quite as much as we probably will in the future. So there's basically, there's some major problems. They really weren't impressed with the hardware, but the biggest oops that they had was that they had approached Moga and Logitech and SteelSeries and basically said, look, you release the game controller, and we're going to make sure that all the games that support your game controllers are going to be featured on our App Store. Has anyone gone to the App Store in the last 9 months and seen the category that said MFI game controllers?
What's an MFI game controller?
Oh, good question. The MFI game controller stands for Made for iPhone, and basically the game controller is adopting the exact button layout that Apple dictates, as well as talking either over the Bluetooth 3.0 spec or through the Lightning connector to the device. So they'd have to have a license from Apple to do that.
So the answer to your question is no.
The answer to my question is no. I never ask questions I don't know the answer to. Go ahead.
So you're speaking of a genre of games that needs a peripheral to interact with an iPhone game?
Correct. Basically, as a game developer, I could say, hey, I don't like the touchscreen controls on the front of my device, and I want to have dual analog joysticks or the bumpers or the 4 typical game controller buttons like my Xbox controller. And so you can adopt a certain scheme within your game saying, this is how I would play my game with this external controller. The iCade, which Martin mentioned earlier, was kind of a way that game developers had hacked around the system because Apple was not supporting those types of controllers and devices explicitly. So iCade basically just mimicked a Bluetooth keyboard. And so that's why it was all just digital inputs, WSAD, that type of thing, to control your games.
How new or old is that feature?
The MFI game controller stuff?
Yeah.
It came out with iOS 7, so it's almost a year old now, I think. So the first prototypes were demoed at WWDC last year in June by Logitech. They're pieces of junk. So anyway, so Apple had promised this exposure to the game controller manufacturers. They promised exposure to the game developers, saying, hey, if you implement this, we'll have a category on the App Store. And they were hoping for a widespread adoption. The oops that they had was that they did have widespread adoption. To basically claim that your game supported the game controller, you just had to do this, import this game controller framework, which you just add and link to it. And the App Store review team was going to get flagged. So an app would come into their system, they'd review it, and a little static analyzer would go against the binary and say, hey, they're linking against the game controller framework. Clearly, they support the game controller. We should make sure that we test this game with the game controller. And then if it's good, the editorial team will shove it into those special categories. What they didn't realize was that Unity 4.2.2, which came out right around this time, automatically linked against that framework for every single Unity game, even if they didn't support it. So that meant that about 80% of the games that are coming through the App Store, which are built on Unity, now claim to support the game controller, when in actuality, none of them did. And so now you have an editorial team that literally cannot actually do their job because they'd have no idea which games in the App Store actually worked with the game controller. So what's the result of all of that? it's basically a media blackout at this point. If you look back through Apple press releases or commercials or announcements over the last 6, 7, 8 months, you will see no discussion of the game controllers. They're in triage mode, trying to figure out what to do. That's my presentation. It's not really about what I do, but that's just kind of some insight that's kind of interesting about what's going on with that scenario.
So is Unity's decision to do that? I mean, what was that?
Yep, that was Unity not talking to Apple, because Apple doesn't like to talk to people typically. And so they threw that in there just to kind of say, hey, if it's an iOS 7 device and the game controller framework's there, let's link against it in case Unity, which is sitting at a higher level, wants to use a game controller. So that's why the code there, that code that I showed you actually is pulled from the Objective-C code that is kicked out when you hit build an iOS project out of Unity. So
does that mean if you use the stock Unity virtual sticks, you would get MFI support in your game?
no, well, if the virtual sticks, your game would still claim to use the game controller, but it doesn't. Yeah.
So they link against it and actually use it?
Yeah. Yes, you can use it. You can still support the MFI game controllers, but you're not going to get any extra exposure from Apple over the deal. There's hopes that they'll be able to figure out during the review process, they'll be able to identify if the APIs are being used, but they're working on it, and it's not looking good right now.
What do you do for your day job?
No, that's not a good question. Sorry, he's an old coworker.
So I'm curious about the hardware companies that might be making specific made-for-iPhone hardware. Do you know of any teams or people who've gotten the green light from Apple to? I there's probably some proprietary groups there.
Well, yeah, you're talking to one. So yeah, my day job is I work at Canopy, and we work on a product called Census, which is basically an iPhone case that adds pressure-sensitive multi-touch sensors to the back and the edges. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is to make sure we don't do an oops like this. This is why this postmortem is relevant to my day job. We have to make sure that when we offer the ability for game developers to be discovered in a new way, a new platform for people to find your game on a new consumer product, that we can live up to it and we don't do something like this. So. But yes, the MFI, there are a few companies around town that have MFI licenses. If you want to know more, I can definitely tell you a lot about that process.
Great.
Yep.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Okay, there you go.
Thanks everyone for coming. Off? Am I on? Did you turn it off?
I don't know, maybe. You just talk about it.
Hello? Hello? Whatever. Does anyone have any, do we want to do QA? I mean, what's the time? I think we have 5 minutes. So does anyone have any additional questions for any of the speakers? Yeah.
I don't really do game development, but is there any cross-platform, generally accepted game engines that everybody uses? Or is it iPhone only? Or?
Well, Unity is definitely the most popular. I mean, he said like 80% of games or whatever, and that was just off the cuff, I'm assuming, but like it's probably close to true. Like 80% of games are made with Unity now. It's ridiculous.
Is that on Android as well?
Yes, Unity supports publishing to most of the platforms. I think they definitely publish to Android, iOS, desktop, PC or Mac, Linux. But they also support Wii U and I think PS4 and Xbox One.
It's expensive, right?
And the Vita now as well. So it's not that expensive comparatively. It's like I want to say 3,000 or something. If you end up like you can start off at the low end. You actually can download it for free. There's a version that will even I think publish to Android and iOS that's free. Yeah.
Has there been any conversation in the groups or community about what Apple TV might do when apps are deployed?
Yeah, I mean any of that is speculative at this
okay,
point. Like,
it is.
I mean, as far as I know, like I really expected last year there to be like a big push for Apple TVs to support game controllers and like with the MFI game controller support. And
I have an interesting little funny thing.
Yeah.
So Scott Davis over there, he makes a game called Conquer. It's really awesome. Check it out. But I was looking at some of its analytics about 8 months ago, and actually it's an iOS iPhone application, and in the analytics, Apple TV showed up a few times. So take that for what it's worth. That was kind of an interesting, like, what the heck?
I have a question. So I'm a dev, but I'm not a game dev. I'm just kind of curious about, I mean, if Unity's so popular, why, it seems like everyone can use it and there's a lot of different applications for it. Why wouldn't you use Unity? Like what cases are there to not use it? I mean, clearly there's other frameworks like Cocoa 2D and stuff like that. I mean, why?
So Unity is, at first it was a 3D framework only. So there's a lot of people who make 2D games in Unity, but they're essentially hacking it. They're essentially like, they've got a plane that they're like projecting a single like camera onto.
It's a big hammer.
It's kind of, yeah, exactly. It's a big hammer to fall down. But the other reason too is that it's also a visual editor. So it's kind of like Flash. Like you have to like be comfortable with and want to work in that like visual editor environment. Now you can write C# for Unity and mostly ignore the visual environment, but like again, that's kind of working around the actual like how you're supposed to use it or whatever.
Right.
Also not free. Yeah, and it's also not free. So if you are
This is a big reason.
yeah.
And it's not open, so whenever you run into like bugs or limitations, you just kind of go, I don't know.
Yeah.
Corona might be something of interest to look into.
There are other like cross-platform frameworks, but none of them as widely adopted for sure. Yeah.
Do most of you guys do your own art? And if not, where do you find your artists? Are there people around town that are just video game artists that don't run a program?
Yeah. So that's one of the great things about coming to like an IGDA meeting is like networking with other people and like there are artists that come, finding other artists. Zach does all his own art, all his pants. Yep. Super skilled. It's like, I mean, most programmers don't do their own art, but yeah.
Question for, was it Zach when using IGDA?
Yes.
What kind of performance are you getting out of that? How's JavaScript on the iPhone?
So JavaScript on the iPhone is very accelerated at this point. I mean, they've done a great job of making high speed, and the fact that your graphics calls are going to OpenGL, like that's really where the slowdown is for most games is graphics throughput. So I mean, pushing a few sprites around on the screen in JavaScript, it's like, you just don't need that much hardware to do that.
I mean,
if you get into really,
seem to be pushing it too
what's
much.
that?
Go get your hands and seem to be pushing the graphics.
No, there's a bajillion 2D games that you can make with IGDA and JavaScript where you would not be able to tell the difference between that and a native because you're just not taxing the hardware enough. It's when you get into stuff that's really math intensive, like intense physics, that you don't really want that physics calculation to happen in an interpreted language. You'd rather have that happen natively if you're doing a lot of math, a lot of heavy physics.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I think we should call it, but we're all going to be around probably for another 5 times at least.
Yeah.
So thanks.